Welcome, everybody. I'm very aware that this is a Saturday afternoon, so you guys could have been anywhere else but listening to us talk, and so we appreciate you being here. We appreciate that you felt this was an important enough thing to spend your leisure time doing. So hopefully we can make it interesting. My name's Chris Constantino. I'm a professor at Florida State University. I'm also a person who stutters, and I'll let Mike introduce himself real quick before I throw up the PowerPoint and get into our talk.
Hi, everyone. I'm Michael Boyle. I'm an associate professor at Montclair State University in New Jersey. And like Chris said, I'm glad that people are joining us here on a Saturday afternoon.
I think everybody can see my screen. It should be working. So we have to do these disclosures before we get started. I've received funding for my research from the NSA, from American Speech Language Hearing Association, and internal funding from my university. I'm also the co-editor of the book Stammering, Pride, and Prejudice.
And as for me, I also received funding from the NSA and from ASHA for some of the research that I'm going to be presenting in this talk. I'm a member of the NSA Research Committee, and I also just want to give a shout out and a thank you to Dr. Rod Gobble, who most of you probably know, who was a collaborator and co-author on the research that I'm going to be talking about.
All right. Just to give you an idea of what you're in for today, I'm going to start talking about why disclosure is important. Why is this an issue for people who stutter? What's the point of talking about this? And then Dr. Boyle is going to talk about some recent research done on disclosure and how we can use the findings from those studies to inform our clinical practice. And so before we talk about disclosure, I think we have to spend some time talking about why it's important, right? And disclosure is always something that occurs socially, right? Like you can't disclose to yourself. It's something that happens between two people. And I think in order to understand why disclosure is important, we have to understand how stuttering is perceived by others, right? What does stuttering look like in the eyes and the ears, look like in the eyes and sound like in the ears of the listeners? So I want to start with a rhetorical question. When you look at these two cartoon characters, which one is disabled? Right? If you know who these characters are, Joe Swanson is from Family Guy and Porky Pig is from Looney Tunes. And the answer is, of course, they're both disabled, right? Joe Swanson is paralyzed and Porky Pig has a stutter. But looking at Porky Pig, you can't tell that there's anything different about him. And of course, that's because stuttering is not visible. And I think this is important. The hidden nature of stuttering is important as we talk about disclosure. Hope Gerlach has recently started studying and writing about stuttering as a concealable, stigmatized identity. And I think this is a really helpful way to think about stuttering, right? Stuttering is not always obvious to others. There's plenty of research that shows that listeners react differently, usually more negatively, to people who stutter, but that this reaction doesn't occur until they hear the person stuttering, right? So in the ears of the listener, you're not a stutterer until someone hears you stutter. And so I want to break down what I mean by concealable stigmatized identity first. Right. So what does concealable mean? Concealment is a deliberate attempt to prevent others from obtaining information. Right. So it's a attempt to hide something on purpose. And stuttering lends itself to concealment because it's so variable, right? We don't always stutter. Obviously, some people stutter more than others, but everybody's stuttering varies. And most people's stuttering varies within the fluent range of speaking. So no matter how frequently you stutter, there's usually times when you don't stutter very much, right? These might be when you're talking to yourself, when you're talking to an animal, whatever have you. There's situations in which your stuttering is quite minimal. It's also concealable because we can hide it, right? And this is well documented. People pass as fluent, people covertly stutter, people avoid stuttering. We're going to talk about passing and fluent and covert stuttering in more detail in a little bit. Just for this point in the talk, just understand that stuttering is concealable because it varies and because it's hideable. What do I mean by it being stigmatized? A stigma is an undesirable difference that devalues an individual or a group, right? And discrimination against stuttering is very well documented. There's plenty of evidence that stuttering is stigmatized. People who stutter are bullied as children, they're denied jobs as adults, they're subject to negative stereotypes, and society is, in general, biased against them. From these experiences, stutterers learn they should not stutter, right? These experiences are internalized as self-stigma. And so concealment is often an attempt by people who stutter to avoid the stigma that society would place on them and to retain their image as an able-bodied, typical person, right? What I'm going to be calling in this talk going forward, able-bodied privilege, right? The idea that there's nothing wrong with you. You're not interrogated as being less than somebody else because of how your body functions. So you can see concealment as a reaction to stigma. And I think these ideas are best illustrated in passing as fluent and covert stuttering. These terms are sometimes used interchangeably, and I think that's usually fine because they're really related. But I think there's a nuanced difference between them that I would like to use just so we're all on the same page. When I say covert stuttering, I'm referring to individual moments of stuttering that the speaker has successfully hidden. So if I'm ordering a sandwich at Subway and I know I'm going to stutter on tomato, and instead of saying tomato, I say olive, right? I just had a moment of stuttering. I successfully hid it from the person making my sandwich. They didn't know that I just stuttered. That is a moment of covert stuttering. I'm referring to individual stuttering moments. When I'm talking about passing as fluent, I'm referring to the role the speaker inhabits in the view of the listener. So if the speaker sees me, if the listener sees me, the speaker, as a fluent person, then I'm passing as fluent. So generally, in order to pass as fluent, you have to be covertly stuttering, right? But I can covertly stutter without passing, right? I may have successfully avoided my stutter on tomato, but I stuttered when I said I wanted a footlong. I stuttered when I said I wanted the Italian bread. You know, I may have showed stuttering at other times. So most people who stutter will try to hide their stuttering at some point. They'll have moments of covert stuttering, but most people who stutter aren't necessarily passing. I want to also add that these things aren't the same as mild stuttering, right? If you simply don't stutter very much, and therefore people don't realize that you stutter, you're not passing as fluent, you're just pretty fluent, right? Passing and covert stuttering are deliberate attempts to conceal. And this leads us to the question, why do people do this, right? Why do people pass? If you stutter, you've probably wondered this yourself as you've been trying to manage your stuttering, right? Why is it so hard to let myself stutter, right? Why, we've known for decades and decades that the less you fight it, the easier it is. And I think this is a question that many of us ask ourselves. Why is it so hard for me to just let it happen? Why am I constantly fighting it? Why am I constantly trying to hide it? And the reason is because there's ethical ramifications to stuttering, right? We are punished for stuttering. We're bullied, we're mocked, we're imitated, we're laughed at. I've talked to people who've been fired from jobs, who have been told in the interview that we can't hire you because you stutter. These are experiences that teach you that you shouldn't stutter. Stuttering gets pitied. It's seen as childish. It's seen as something that's controllable, right? Even I think speech therapy can sometimes be complicit in advertising itself as guaranteeing fluency, right? And so if there's fluency guarantees, if we're not able to be fluent, it's somehow our fault. And so there's all these things that I think put in our minds that we shouldn't be stuttering. And so why do we conceal? We conceal to avoid all those negative consequences, right? We conceal to achieve a universal norm, to secure those able-bodied privileges that we were talking about earlier. We conceal to avoid stigma, and we conceal to continue to be seen as a fluent person in the eyes of our listeners. If you successfully pass as fluent, you may be able to avoid that stigma. You may be able to hold on to that able-bodied privilege. Nonetheless, there's often consequences to concealment, right? Most people who pass will tell you that it's very, very difficult. It's draining. It affects their psychological health. It lowers their quality of life. When you look at most therapy literature, whether it's for stuttering or any other disorder, coping with concealment, where you're instead of moving towards the problem, you're hiding the problem, you're moving away from the problem, is almost always associated with negative health outcomes, right? It causes cognitive and emotional discomfort. It might provide relief in the short term, right? You have avoided that punishment for stuttering, but in the long term, you're constantly doing things that undermine what you want to do. In order to conceal, you have to focus excessively on yourself, right? You're thinking about your speech, your language. You're thinking about hiding stuttering. You're not able to be in the moment. You're not able to fully attend to what the listener is saying. You're also not talking to people about something that's bothering you, right? If you're passing in most of your relationships in life, then you're not recruiting friends to help you with your stuttering. You're not recruiting family members to help you with stuttering. You might not even be seeking professional help, right? You are putting barriers up between you and others that prevent them from helping you when you need help the most. So while concealment might allow you to avoid stigma in the moment, it has lots of other downstream effects that can be very, very difficult. So that brings us to what do we do about that, right? What can we do to resist the side effects of concealment? And I think this is where disclosure comes in, right? Disclosure can be seen as the opposite of concealment, right? If they contradict each other. If you've disclosed, you can't be concealing. Disclosure makes concealment impossible. Disclosure is simply the sharing of personal information with others. So if concealment was the deliberate hiding of personal information. Disclosure is the opposite. It's the deliberate sharing of it. And the literature's documented effects of disclosure are just about the opposite of the documented effects of concealment. With almost all concealable stigmatized identities, whether that's your sexual orientation, history with, right? There's lots of concealable stigmatized identities. It might be homosexuality, it might be history of criminality, history of drug use, history of having had an abortion, being transgender, so on. There's innumerable things that society stigmatizes, right? And in each of those, disclosure often brings positive effects and increases psychological well-being. It does this for a number of reasons. One is you're no longer spending so much energy trying to hide. You're no longer spending so much energy worrying about getting caught. You're also able to share sensitive and vulnerable parts of yourself with others who are then able to act as friends and as support systems, right? By showing others where you're sensitive, they're able to respond to that and help you. In the coping literature, whereas concealment is seen as an avoidance strategy, disclosure is seen as an approach strategy. And this has innumerable positive effects. Disclosure puts you in the driver's seat, right? It's something that you can choose to do at any given moment. So that increases feelings of self-efficacy and agency, right? Self-efficacy is simply your confidence that you can do a specific thing in a specific situation, right? So you can tell yourself, in this situation, if I'm feeling nervous, I can disclose, right? That's a positive thing you can do, and nobody can take that away from you. Agency is your ability to be a determining, choice-making person, right? You can choose to do this anytime you want. Disclosure is often more difficult in the moment, especially at first, right? Because you're disclosing something that's stigmatized, right? Stuttering is seen negatively by others. And so it's hard to work up the courage to tell people about it. You're worried about what people might think about you. You're worried about what the ramifications of not being seen as normal are. But the long-term effects are that you're living a life where you're not hiding. You're living a life where you're making choices that you want to make, rather than the choices you have to make to continue concealing. It helps you accept yourself, and it helps you accept the situation. Mike is going to tell you a story about his personal interest in disclosure and how he came about being interested in it. So I'm going to stop sharing and pass it over to him.
Thank you very much, Chris. And I just want to say that I'm very happy to be presenting here with Chris. He's been doing a lot of great work in the area of covert stuttering and many other interesting areas, and I look forward to following his work in the upcoming years. So thank you, Chris. A few things. I've been attending this conference, and I've been looking and watching in on the various workshops, and a lot of what I'm going to say in terms of what I found in my research, there's a lot of echoes of what we've heard from our other guests and panelists, which I think is a good thing in terms of research anyway. And I guess my confidence in the findings that I see it sort of generalizing to a lot of other people. So in previous days, we heard from Pam and from Darcy and Charlie and Ian and George and Muna, and they all had sort of similar stories in terms of disclosure. Obviously not exactly the same, but I think there can be common themes. And a lot of that is reflected in the research that I'm about to share as well. I also, before I get into the research, I just wanted to um, sort of give you a background for why I'm interested in this topic of disclosure. Um, Teddy Roosevelt has a quote that I like, which is that nobody cares how much you know until they know how much you care. And so, why do I care about this? Well, when I was growing up, I was very much, I would say, ashamed of my stuttering. I tried to hide it, and I was pretty successful at that, especially as I got older. But when I was younger, probably early school age and preschool age, I tried to hide it, but I couldn't hide it. But when I was in school, probably second, third grade, and certainly fourth and fifth, classmates would imitate how I spoke, and they would say, not even necessarily bullying, but just out of genuine curiosity, why do you talk like that? And I had no idea what to say. And I think that's an experience that a lot of people who stutter have. And not only that, but when I got a bit older, I think I was around 12, and I went to an intensive fluency shaping program that was 3 weeks long. And I had a very different way of speaking when I came back. And, but I was still very closed off about it. I think I was probably, passing, as Chris would say, or certainly trying to be, covert. And I didn't tell people where I actually went. So I made up an excuse that I was visiting extended family somewhere. Nobody knew what I was doing. And when I came back, I spoke differently because this program had me speak differently. That's the goal, is to change how you talk. And some of my friends said, why are you talking like that? You seem to be talking differently. Things seem to be coming out a lot more slowly. What's going on? And again, I didn't know what to say because I was never comfortable talking about stuttering. And so to me, this is very relevant on a personal level. And I think back to those years and I think to myself, if I had known how to talk about it, that would have probably helped a lot. And I had a lot of therapy growing up from the time I was 3 to the time I was 22. And nobody up until the very end ever talked about this. And so it was, we're going to get you fluent. And so I had no idea how to actually talk about stuttering. And I just think that that would have helped, because if anybody asks, why do you talk like that? If I had a response that I felt good about saying in a kind of a direct, neutral way, not only could everybody, kind of get on the same page, but then you can move on. Because if somebody asks you that, especially as a young kid in school, right? Why do you talk like that? And you can't respond, all the other kids around you hear that, or hear the lack of response. And it's sort of this mystery keeps propagating itself because you don't say anything about it. You don't know how to talk about it. And instead of being able to say, oh, I stutter, it takes me a little bit longer sometimes to say what I want to say. Instead of being able to say that and having people say, oh, okay, and then moving on, if there's just silence, it's not going to help. And people are going to keep wondering why you talk like that. And so I think that's why it's very relevant to me, just looking back on my own personal experience. And I think that would have helped. So for all the clinicians out there, I think disclosure and just being able to talk about stuttering, even as a young kid, can be really, really helpful. So I suspect that a lot of SLPs today, present company excluded probably, because you're all here on a Saturday afternoon learning about stuttering, so you probably care a lot about it. But most general SLPs probably, I'm guessing, don't do this in therapy. Why? My guess is that they don't know how to explain it either. If you've been attending these sessions, the genetics with Shelley Jo Kraft and Per talking about the kind of physiology of it, it's hard to explain. Even professionals have a hard time explaining stuttering. So I think that's a part of it. People just don't know how to talk about it. The other thing, in my experience, that a lot of SLPs have a problem with, or they have a different mentality of stuttering. And if they think that this is like an artic disorder, and they just think, well, I'll give them some fluency shaping, I'll teach them how to not stutter, why bother with disclosure? Because it's a in their mind, it's a relatively short-term thing. They can get over it if they want to. Why bother with disclosure? And that's not just my opinion. There are prominent researchers and theorists in our field who have said exactly that. Why bother with this stuff? Look at the core issue, and the core issue is you stutter. So let's get rid of the stuttering. That's their argument. My argument is that, well, that's just not really what we know about stuttering, first of all. And it presupposes that it can just go away. If you work at it hard enough, or if you want it hard enough, it can just go away. So, but that's not true. It's just not true. It's not a good match for what we know about stuttering and all of this current research coming out. So I think that's another reason why a lot of clinicians neglect to talk about disclosure. So one other thing that I just want to say before I start on the more research part of it, I think that for people like me who grew up pretty covert, or at least trying to be, right, Chris? I mean, there's a difference between really passing, I guess, and thinking that you're passing, right? I think I passed with some people. Certainly, a lot of other people knew that I spoke differently. But I think for me, and I know a lot of other people are like me. Not everyone, not all people who stutter, but a lot of people who stutter try to hide it a lot, and they have a lot of fear about their stuttering, and they want to avoid it at all costs. For people like that, purely fluency shaping is probably not going to work out too well. Maybe it could, but for a lot of people, it might give them some short-term relief. But in my experience, if there's a lot of concealment or efforts at concealment, it can actually, the strictly fluency shaping approach can actually fan the flames of avoidance, because the client is using it as an avoidance tactic. So fluency shaping can be avoidance, and it can be used that way. And that was certainly how it was for me. I wanted to learn how to use these tools so I wouldn't stutter anymore, because I didn't want anybody to know that I stuttered. So I was using it out of fear of being found out. And if that's why you're doing it, it's probably not going to last very long, because you're never really addressing the underlying issue, which is, why are you afraid of it to begin with? And why should you be afraid of it? So those are some points that, and now, again, it's not true of everybody who stutters. I'm not saying that my experience is like everybody else's experience, but I do know for myself and for a lot of people that I've met in the stuttering community, their experiences match with mine, many of them. Okay, so I just want to put that out there. So I'm going to tell you about some research that I've been conducting with Rod Gobble over the past couple of years. And I wanted to get into disclosure in terms of research because there's kind of a resurgence of that recently. Any of you who keep up to date with the stuttering literature know there's been a lot more studies recently about disclosure. I mean, Chris has obviously been doing a lot on covert stuttering. Dr. Courtney Bird at the University of Texas, Austin has been doing a lot of work about disclosure recently. And so I wanted to kind of get back into this. I also research a lot on stigma, and I think this is very much related, as Chris mentioned, because disclosure can be thought of as a stigma management tool. How do you manage the stigma of stuttering? I think disclosure is very relevant to that. So because of that reason, also because of my own intuition about how important it is, and a lot of that is based on my own personal experience, as I mentioned. And then the other part of why I was really interested in this was that disclosure is a term that you will read about probably in any stuttering textbook that's out there, right? It's a pretty commonly used term in our field. And yet, in my judgment, until recently, we didn't really have a good idea of exactly what it was or how it's best executed. You hear a lot about disclosure, but there's not a whole lot of detail about, well, how do you do it? When do you do it? Why do you do it? What are some ways not to do it, right? So there just seemed to be a lack of nuance about how to go about it. And if we lack nuance about that, then we're not going to be as effective as we could be in clinic. Because it's not as simple as to say, okay, we'll just go disclose because I've heard that disclosure is a good thing. So let's really try to understand more of the ins and outs of disclosure. So with that as a preface and as a backstory, so I hope you're all with me here. I'm going to share my screen. Hopefully this works. All right, let's see. All right, so I think everybody can see this. I'm going to put it into slideshow mode here. All right, so the importance of disclosure for people who stutter. We've talked about this a bit before, but it's really a crucial moment. It's where the private becomes public. It's the moment of truth, so to speak, where the thing that very often you want to keep inside is now out there. So it's a big moment. And it's often a big concern for people who stutter. And it really, at its core, answers the question, do you want to be known as a person who stutters in this situation? That's kind of a big question, right? And if so, how? How do you want to come across as a person who stutters? So basically, how do you manage your identity related to stuttering? So it gets to the core issue of identity. How do you see yourself, and how do you want other people to see you? All of these really important ideas wrapped into this idea of disclosure. So the results that I'm going to be talking about, again, come from a study that I did with Rod Gobble. There are two here that that were just published this past year. The first one here is the one that's going to be more relevant to the data that I'm about to present. The other one down here is more long-term journeys of people who stutter and in the journey from more concealment to more openness over the span of their life. But the first one here is what I'm going to be talking about today with you, which is the moment of disclosure, the actual disclosure event itself, and how to better understand that moment. And I can share these links in the chat as well when I get a second, or Chris can even post it, or somebody could if you wanted to as I'm going. The other thing is, if you don't work at a university and you don't have access to the full article, just email me afterward and I'll send you the full article. Okay. All right. So we basically interviewed 12 people who stutter, who were involved in the self-help support world and known as being out there about their stuttering. And when I mean out there, I mean that in the positive sense, in terms of they're public about their stuttering. they are open about it in at least some life situations. So we selectively kind of chose these participants because we thought they could tell us about what we were interested in, which is being open about stuttering. So we interviewed them and we did thematic analyses. So this is a model that we kind of came up with that is adapted from a model by Chaudhry and Fisher, who are in the field of psychology, who have talked about concealable stigmatized conditions. So it's modeled in a way after that, but it also fit our data very well. So this is really how we looked at the process of disclosure. You have the antecedents, in other words, what happens before in terms of, so like, for example, a person's goals about how they're going to disclose when, where, and why. And then you have the event itself in terms of what it looks like and what words are used and how a person does it, what's more helpful, what's not as helpful. And then you have the outcomes in terms of, are there pros, are there cons, so, and what the main kind of point in all this is going to be is that all these things are connected. So the antecedents, the event itself, and the outcomes are all connected to each other in this process. And that's really what we learned from this project. The intent you have about why you're doing it impacts how you do it, which impacts how it's received, which then creates a feedback loop that's going to play into your future planning about when and why you continue to disclose. So we have a few different steps or components of this process, and they're all connected. And I'm going to talk more about that in a few minutes. So let's talk about when, where, why, and how, and what the outcomes are. The antecedents, what comes, so in other words, why do people disclose? They want to feel like they can take control of the situation. They want to feel better. Often you hear people say, it just lightens the burden. It lightens my load. It just takes a weight off my shoulders to have this information out there. I don't have to be worried about it so much. A lot of people said, it makes me feel authentic. It makes me feel like my real self, like I'm not trying to hide something, which is a really interesting answer that I've heard a lot of the presenters in this conference talk about. Preempting listener confusion. George Tequila talked about this yesterday, and he used a phrase that I really liked, that I hadn't heard it in quite this way, but I think he said something like, you control the narrative or something like that. So you are on offense. You put it out there what this is so that that there's no mistaking what it is. So you're in control of the narrative, and you don't just leave it to chance that a person is going to misinterpret your speech. You can receive support or accommodations, for example, at work or at school, if you disclose, that you couldn't get if you didn't disclose. A lot of people also said it can weed people out, which I thought was pretty interesting. Like, you can find out who your true friends are, who your true allies are. And if I stutter around you and you have a problem with that, or you don't like me because of it, all right, good. See you later. I don't want to be around you anyway. If the person is actually trying to be mean, right? Not just like a genuine curiosity and talking about stuttering and why do you talk like that, but if they're actually trying to be mean about it, that's probably not a person that that you want to be around. To improve communication, a lot of people said that they actually kind of got more fluent. Not to say that fluency is the end all be all, or even that it's important necessarily, but a lot of people happen to mention that it makes them feel more fluent. A lot of people said it helps them stay present. That's something that we've even heard during this conference. Stay in the present moment. Again, they're not burdened. They're not cognitively burdened anymore by what's going to happen if I stutter, and when am I going to stutter, and how am I going to react? How are they going to react? You you're just open about it and you take all that off the table, and it frees up a lot more space for you to be in the present moment. And the other thing is to change society on kind of a macro level, to change people's perceptions, to educate other people about stuttering. The more open we are as people who stutter with other people out there in the world, the more other people out there are going to know about stuttering. That's a really important thing. When do people do it? Very often they do it in professional settings. So things like job interviews and high stakes, important situations, like when you feel that you're being judged. So like a job talk or a school presentation or something like that. You could also do it in a response to negative or confused listener reactions. So if somebody says something sort of mean, or maybe it's kind of like they're showing that they're confused about why you're talking like this, or they give you the look, right? Those of us who stutter will know what the look is, right? Where you say something and you kind of get that look of like, and the person has that little moment of what's going on. And so that might be a good moment to disclose, when you're aware that they're kind of confused about what's going on. Some people said that, I don't have one way of doing it. The way that I disclose really depends on the situation. What I say to the person at Starbucks as I'm ordering my coffee is not how I'm going to do it before a job talk, maybe not, right? So it differs depending on the situation. Some people said, if I'm around someone who I anticipate being around in the future, long term, I want them to know. And that's interesting too, because if you're somebody who can get away with appearing like a fluent speaker when you meet somebody new, you have to weigh that out, right? It's like, just because I can be fluent with this person right now, if I anticipate they're going to be in my life for a long time to come, then you have people thinking about, well, should I disclose even if I don't have to? Should I voluntarily stutter? Because even though I'm not stuttering naturally right now, when I meet them again next week and I stutter, are they going to think that's strange? So maybe I'll just put that out there now, even though I don't have to. Other people use it when speech is or expected to be difficult. If some people, and a lot of people who stutter out there, I'm sure can relate to this feeling of, you just know it's one of those days where speech is harder, and that's a common experience. And so a lot of times people, if they're having a harder day in terms of their speech, might disclose more just to let the listener know. What does it actually look like? Well, the way that Rod and I define disclosure is just simply transmitting the identity of a person who stutters to somebody else. So how do you actually transmit that information? It can come in a variety of forms, actually. You can disclose by simply talking and stuttering openly and not trying to conceal. You can voluntary stutter. You can let listeners know you stutter before the stuttering is observable. Like if you're giving a talk, hey, I just want to let you know that I stutter. So in case you hear me get stuck sometimes, that's what that is. So you can kind of preempt it like that. Some people do it after the fact. Like if you get into a block, you say, you probably just noticed there, I stutter. So you can do it either before or after. You can do it to respond to negative listener reactions or confused reactions, as I said, or to educate other people. Some people also do it to tell their listener how they'd like them to respond. Like, hey, I would appreciate it if you could just give me a few extra seconds. So you can kind of educate people about that as well. So the disclosure itself can come in a variety of different forms. Some helpful approaches. Now, this varied across our participants. It wasn't consistent across the board, but some people said, I really like to be direct and brief. So if we're going around the room and we have to introduce ourselves, I might just say, just before I start, I stutter, and then just immediately start talking about whatever it was that you're going to start talking about. So very brief, very direct. And some people like that because it didn't stall things. It kind of kept things flowing. It was enough to let people know why they were talking like that, but they didn't get in the weeds of it. So some people like that approach. Other people liked a more elaborated approach where they kind of educate people and they include additional information. So it might sound like, hey, I just want to let you know that I stutter. So in case you hear me not be able to get words out, that's what that is. I want to let you know that so that you're not confused about why I'm doing that. It's not that I've forgotten what I was going to say. It's not because I'm nervous. It's just because of my stuttering. And if you have any questions about it, please let me know. Okay, so that would be an example of maybe a bit elaborated with the educational piece. And it also opens the door to let people know that you can talk about this with me. I'm open to answering any questions. So it makes it not taboo. It addresses the elephant in the room, so to speak. Some people who stutter might stutter voluntarily and reference it. If they don't feel like they have any natural stuttering, they might just want to preempt that and just have some voluntary stuttering. I have to say that was probably not as commonly used. A lot of people who stutter, even though we've heard about the benefits of voluntary stuttering, in practice, in my experience, most people who stutter don't use it very much in real life. It's very hard to do. And also, if you stutter, very often you stutter naturally anyway. So, you don't need to fake it because it'll be there. Some people like to post on social media, and so on Facebook or Twitter, and they might have a post about how they're attending this conference for stuttering or a charity for stuttering or something like that, and they can broadcast it that way. A lot of people, by the way, who had a history of being covert like this approach because they could just broadcast it to their friends on Facebook who they've known for like years and years, without having to have an individual conversation with all their old friends about, hey, we never really talked about this when we were younger, but I actually stutter. I'm not sure if you knew that. Yeah, so instead of having to do that, they kind of like to be able to post things on their social media. And that way they could have the conversation a bit more indirectly, wasn't as uncomfortable for them. So that's an interesting one for people who are covert. Some less helpful approaches were also mentioned in terms of some people said that if I just disclose with no follow-up statement, that can feel awkward. Meaning if you just stutter openly or voluntarily, but then you don't put a label to it, you don't say, oh, I stutter, then the problem with that, according to a lot of our participants, was that it still leaves too much up for interpretation on the part of the listener, especially if you block a lot, right? Because like for me personally, I have a lot of silent blocks. A lot of people in the general public don't know that that's stuttering. So if I, get stuck in my name, it might just not come out. And there's not a lot of visible tension. And so people don't know what's going on. And so, in that case, stuttering openly really wouldn't help very much because the listener really doesn't know what's happening. And so I need to educate them with some words in terms of, hey, this is stuttering, just so you know. So a lot of people said that was not as helpful if they didn't if they didn't explain it. A lot of people weren't crazy about voluntary stuttering, as I mentioned, even though we often hear about it. Some people don't like social media posts because they feel like it's just out there on the internet. They can't really interact with the person. They don't know how the information is being processed. So some people like social media posts, some people don't. One thing that was consistent across all participants was the idea that if you do it in an apologetic or confessional way, it's not as helpful, right? So I'm sorry, but I stutter. Please bear with me, in kind of the apologetic or confessional tone, not going to be as beneficial. If you have poor body language, right? If you're looking down, if your shoulders are slumped, if you act like you don't want to be saying what you're saying, even if you say the words, I stutter, your body language also speaks. And if there's a disconnect between those, the listener often picks up on the body language and tone of voice more than even the words that you're using. So that's an important one as well. Being forced into doing it, not as helpful. Okay, so relevant for therapy, I guess. Some people said if you elaborate too much or make too big a deal out of it, that's not as good, right? If you Some people like to add humor and kind of a self-deprecating joke. Some people do not like that. So there's no one approach is basically what I'm saying, but it kind of does vary across different people. And it also varies within the same person depending on the circumstance. So as I said before, how you talk to your waiter at dinner, if anybody is still going out to dinner these days, probably not much, but or at Starbucks, that's going to be different probably from what you do at a job interview. So it's not like there's just one strategy. The reaction of the listener. In general, most of the participants said that when they disclosed and they were open about their stuttering, most of the reaction was either positive or neutral. In terms of they were grateful that they shared it, they were compassionate, they even asked questions about stuttering, they were actually curious about it and wanted to learn more. There were some negative things as well in terms of people giving overly simplistic advice like, oh, that's fine, just take your time. It's like, okay, thanks. Or oh, you don't really stutter, do you? I don't notice anything. Oh, wow, no. That's not very helpful. It kind of minimizes, stuttering. And some people just being outright rude, right? Mimicking it, rude comments. That was relatively rare though. And it really only happened when the person wasn't talking about stuttering. But everybody said that in general, reactions were better when they were open about it compared to when they were trying to conceal. Even though you can still get some negative reactions if you're open about it, in general, it was way better for them to be open. So there are benefits of this at different levels. At the individual level, as I said, it can reduce worry and fear and inhibition. It increases authenticity, more presence in the moment. People thinking that they are doing a better job with their speaking and their communicating, increasing their sense of dignity and self-respect. Many people talked about that as well. In terms of benefits at the dyadic level, meaning at the one-on-one level, so a conversation partner, a lot of people said, it opened up stuttering for conversation. The listener was less worried about it and could focus more on my message. A lot of people said it impresses other people. They trusted me more because I was open. We heard a lot about that with Ian Wilkie and George Tequila's presentation yesterday. Increases trust. Your connections with other people can get stronger, right? You can break through the facade that a lot of us try to present as we meet somebody new. If we're out there and vulnerable about something that would probably bother a lot of people, they can kind of admire that and reciprocate by sharing their own stories, their own things that they may have struggled with in life. And so we can get a deeper connection with them sometimes. It can also weed out negative people, as I've talked about. At the social contextual level, people said, I'm involved in the stuttering community. I can help other people who stutter if I'm open about it, right? And the NSA certainly provides a lot of opportunity for just that. This idea of acting on behalf of other people who stutter and feeling like their mission is to change the world's perceptions of stuttering and to educate other people. So that when I disclose, that's not just for me necessarily in my own comfort level, because I might say, if somebody says something rude or they have this ignorant comment, do I really need to go into the education thing? Do I really have to do that? A lot of people get tired of it. They don't want to bother. But some of the participants said, in that moment, I think about other people who stutter, who are out there. And I think about, if I don't educate this person, it's more likely that other people who stutter are going to continue facing this negative feedback. So they think about other people at a societal contextual level as well. So there were some drawbacks, though. It's not all a pleasant picture. Stigma is real, as we've talked about, but it can feel awkward. So, disclosure is not always the most fun thing. It can feel kind of awkward. It can feel easier to avoid. A lot of people who stutter who are better at concealing, they can hide it. It's harder to be open about it. It takes more cognitive effort and more risk, obviously. People could look at you differently. They can give you unsolicited advice. They can make snap judgments. A lot of people that we interviewed were worried in two contexts came up a lot. That is job interviews and actually online dating, where it's like, do I put this up front? Do I put like a job interview and a date is kind of the same thing in a way. But it's kind of like, do I want to present this information about myself up front first? Some people did, some people didn't, because they felt like I want this person to get to know me better before they know about my stuttering. So there's debate about that. Not everybody thought about it the same. Of course, you open yourself up to discrimination, negative comments, not being promoted, not being hired. And there's a stigma attached to it, as Chris mentioned. I've done a lot of work in this. Look, if it was easy, everybody would be doing it, right? So there is a cost to it. It's not a simple thing. So back to this process in general, and how this works, how the antecedent, the event itself, and the outcome are linked. You can imagine if a person was really kind of apologetic about it and confessional, they are going to say things and look and sound in a way that's going to probably make other people not receive it as well. And then the person speaking is going to, feel that, not really have a good experience. And then it's going to lead to them wanting to probably close themselves off even more. But if a person is open and they want to really educate other people about stuttering, and that's their goal, they're probably going to come across more confident. It's going to be received probably better by the listener, which is then going to be experienced better by the speaker, and make it more likely that they're going to continue to disclose. So again, all these things are linked. So the intent behind it matters. Why you do it matters. So applications for clinic. I want to end soon so that we can have some time for questions. So I'm going to go through this relatively quickly, but what you can do in clinic or in self-help situations, help the client weigh the pros and cons. What would happen, do you think, if you were open about this with different people across different situations, and maybe make a little pros and cons list? Brainstorm and consider different ways of disclosing. As we talked about in this presentation, there's many ways of being open about it. So you can come up, ask your client to think about all the possible ways that they could be open about their stuttering, and then at the end come to a set that they feel comfortable with. You might, for example, practice creating and scripting different disclosure messages and approaches for different circumstances, like for more formal occasions versus more informal, quick interactions. You could role play in therapy as well, so they actually have experience doing this. And then you can vary the elements of it. You can vary it in terms of, okay, what would it sound like in terms of disclosing without the verbal statement and with it? How is that going to sound different and feel different? How about if the verbal statement is before a moment of stuttering or after, right? How about if we experiment with your body language and your tone of voice, right? And your eye contact. So modifying all of those different things can help a person really be able to see. It's not just like either you disclose or you don't. There's a lot of gray area there in terms of how you actually disclose. Some other considerations for SLPs, screen the client for high levels of avoidance and fear. Because if they're high on avoidance and fear, it's going to be very unlikely that they're going to want to disclose. And you might want to set approached focused goals for those clients and kind of work their way up gradually to being able to disclose in more difficult situations. There are likely foundational strategies that clients can learn before being expected to disclose in terms of teaching effective communication skills like eye contact, increasing coping skills for negative listener responses that they might get. Like, if you do get a negative response, what could you do, right? So being able to practice that, and just in general, desensitizing through things like stuttering modification, avoidance reduction, mindfulness, ACT, all that stuff. That can be very important as well. So we don't just want to throw somebody to the wolves and tell them to disclose before they're really ready for it. Because if they have a bad experience, I can speak from experience. I've disclosed in the past, out of more like desperation, like more kind of confessional. And that didn't feel very good. And I certainly didn't feel empowered doing that. And I didn't want to keep doing it. So we have to really take into account that intent matters. So some conclusions and take home points here as I wrap up. Disclosure is an
Hey, Mike, can I add something quickly?
Yeah.
About a clinical point?
Yeah.
I have noticed with myself and also with many of my clients that we often get to a point with our stuttering where we've gotten so comfortable with disclosure and we have found it so useful that it almost becomes a crutch, right? That I'm not comfortable in this situation until I've disclosed, right? It's such a powerful tool for introducing the people you're speaking to that you stutter, that you can feel like something's missing if you haven't disclosed in various situations. And so I think often with my clients, we come to a point where we start purposely not disclosing, right? Because I want them to feel comfortable stuttering, having stuttering be a mystery, right? I want you to get comfortable with your listener not knowing what's going on, right? Because you can't disclose in each and every situation. That's unrealistic. And so can you speak comfortably with your listener in confusion, right? I think that's an important skill as well. And so disclosure is not necessarily good or bad. It's a tool to achieve an objective, and I think we have to be flexible with it.
Yeah. So
That's all, Mike.
yeah. So that's an interesting point, Chris. And I would think that is probably a more difficult way of doing it, probably, in terms of if people feel like it's helpful to add the verbal message because they feel like it's going to clear up confusion. What you're saying is, okay, well, if it would be more difficult then if you were able to sit with the confusion, basically, of your listener, which is, I would think, a more advanced step, probably.
Yes.
But like Darcy, I think it was Darcy, on Thursday, a part of Pam's panel there, and she made the point, which I thought was a great point, that saying that you stutter without stuttering is not the same as stuttering. And I just love how she put that in that succinct way, because I think she really got at what a lot of us have felt, but maybe weren't able to articulate as well, which is that it's one thing to talk about it. It's another thing to do it, which might explain why we sometimes aren't crazy about the role models who stutter, who don't actually stutter very much in public, because the stigma of it is the stuttering. And to a certain extent, it's the identity, maybe, but the stuff that people really react to is the stuttering. And so, and Chris, by the way, there were people in the sample that we interviewed who said just that they were really trying to just stutter openly, because they said, it's one thing to say that I stutter. I've gotten good at that. I'm okay with that. What I still have trouble with is just stuttering without explaining it, just being open. And so I think that is reflected in your comments as well. And so as I wrap up here, just a few quick points. Is that disclosure is an ongoing and complex issue for people who stutter. It's hard. It requires cognitive resources. People think about how they're going to do it, when they're going to do it, why. They're monitoring listener reactions as they're doing it to guide what they do next, right? So do I keep being open about it? Do I pull back? Some of that might be related to the response you get. So there's a lot of cognitive effort going on there. It's not an easy thing to do, and it's ongoing. Somebody said that disclosure is like a constant public relations issue. It's like trying to get it out there. How do you want to be seen? These elements of the process may impact each other. For instance, why you do something has an impact on how you do it and how other people respond to it, which is going to impact your likelihood of doing it that way again in the future. And it really does represent how you present yourself in relation to your stuttering, and therefore how you and other people feel about your identity. And the last point is that it's important for all of you as clinicians and advocates, because making good disclosure decisions can really impact a person's communicative functioning and their well-being. So it's not a trivial issue, and it's something that you can do with, it's not at all contingent on fluency, right? So I think this is, in my mind anyway, this is where our field is moving. And Chris is doing some great work in this, and I'm fortunate enough to be working with him on some of this in terms of spontaneity. What are we at here? What's the goal of this? Is it to get rid of stuttering, or is it to be authentic and to talk and to enjoy talking and to be spontaneous? So disclosure is a way that you can improve communication without it being contingent on a person being able to change how they talk. So you get a lot of bang for your buck, so to speak. It can be a very, very powerful thing that is underestimated in terms of its importance. So I think I'll stop there, and thanks very much. I'll stop my share now and we can take questions.
Yeah, we have about 10 minutes, a little bit less for questions. And so there were some questions that were coming up as we were talking. I think some of them got answered. I see Ian has asked a good one that I think actually, Mike, you can speak directly to this from some of your other research. Ian asks, how much do we know about how the listener feels or thinks when a person stutter discloses? And I think immediately of your study with the 3 different conditions.
Yeah, so Ian, that's a big question, and there's a lot of research on that. I can send you some literature that would get into the long form answer of this, but in the time that we have, I will just say that there is evidence to show that it's beneficial, that it can not only have a positive impact on the speaker, but a positive impact on the listener. But the caveat is that how you do it matters. So that's true not only for the person speaking, but for the audience. So if they do it in an apologetic way, it's not going to be as effective, right? If they do it in an assertive way that kind of counters the stereotype of stuttering as being kind of shy and timid and not very confident. And if you do it forcefully or confidently, that can make a big difference. So it can help, but you always have to be mindful about how you're doing it, because that really does matter a lot. But if it's done well, if I can use that term, then it can absolutely have a big impact on people's perceptions.
There's a question, any suggestion on disclosure for 4 to 7-year-olds as they relate to children themselves, teachers, and to other kids? Yeah, I've worked with plenty of elementary school and middle school children, and we've done a lot of work with disclosure, because I think maybe more so than adults, children are willing to say, why do you talk like that, right? Like what's happening here, right? Children won't see that as offensive as adults might. And so I think giving children ways of responding to those curious questions, right? So role playing responses. I worked in school, so I was always seeing my children in groups, right? So I could have a child who's working on articulation play the interlocutor, right? Asking the child who stutters questions, and they would have to respond in appropriate ways. I've also found that children quickly understand that this is an easy way to talk about stuttering, right? That if they bring it up quickly, it gets it out of the way. And I've had children who get like very gung-ho about bringing stuttering up as often as they possibly can. I don't think children are as different from adults in this aspect of therapy. So are there any other questions?
Feel free to just jump in too on your mic if you don't want to go through the chat.
I'll just say an additional thought that's popped into my head while we're waiting for more questions. I think I just talked about at the end how disclosure can sometimes be a crutch. I think that's if you're doing disclosure for yourself. But as Dr. Boyle was talking about, you can also do disclosure to teach more people about stuttering, right? Disclosure can be a way to make society friendlier to stuttering. So even if you're not nervous, right? Even if you're not worried about stuttering, talking about it, identifying as a stutterer can help make the stutterer coming behind you feel safer in a situation.
Yeah, so Chris, a few things that I'm seeing at the end of the chat. Somebody asked, I usually do not disclose my stuttering as new people can hear it anyway. Can this still be seen as a form of disclosure? I would say technically, yeah, because you're transmitting the information that you stutter, but you could, I mean, if you felt like you wanted to add some more in terms of like, maybe just stuttering openly doesn't like the listener knows that something is different, but they might not know very much about stuttering. And so adding the verbal clarification or statement might be additionally beneficial. But yeah, I think being open is a form of disclosure. So that's one. Just another question for a young kid who's about 4, who says, you know, why do I talk like this? That's something in terms of trying to give them a way to actually verbalize it. So, oh, you know, speech is a very complicated thing. You have to use different parts of your brain, and sometimes different parts of the brain need more time than other parts to catch up. And so sometimes when that happens, speech comes out a bit bumpy, and that's okay. It's just a part of your learning. And Scott Yaris and Nina Reeves have written beautifully about this and their approach. And so that's the approach that they kind of recommend in terms of giving even a young child of 3 or 4 or 5 a script of, you know, speech is kind of a complicated thing, and our brain is doing a lot of different things at once, and sometimes you need more time. And so when that happens, it's okay. And I want to hear what you have to say, even if it comes out of, you know, bumpy. So kind of normalizing it, making it okay, destigmatizing it. Yeah, and if you like that explanation, I would highly recommend looking at a lot of what Scott Yaris and Nina Reeves have written about preschool intervention, because they go on in a lot more detail about that. And again, you can email me or Chris for additional questions or for more materials as well.
I've put our emails in the chat, and also I think our contact information is up on the NSA website for this talk, I think.
Great.
If it's not, it's definitely in the chat.
Right. Okay, the slides, Chris and I hadn't actually talked about the slides being public, but we can talk about that afterward. And if people email us, I'm sure we can work something out, right, Chris?
Yeah, I don't have any problem with that.
Okay, so just email us directly then. Okay, well, thank you all very much. I see a lot of friends and colleagues out there. I miss.
I want to. Joy asked a really nice question.
Yeah.
Do you think it helps for parents of children to disclose? I think parents can also have stigma, right? That parents can be struggling with the same sort of stigma that people who stutter struggle with. So I think to disclose that, yes, that's my kid. He stutters. can be just as powerful tool of a tool for parents to embrace the identity of their child. I think disclosure is important for them too.
Yes, I agree with that totally.
Chris,
I can see our moderators itching to close us down.
No, it's okay. If you guys have something else to say or there's other questions, please feel free. Absolutely.
Thank you for having us, Tammy.
I think Lee might have a question. He's got his hand raised.
Oh, yeah.
He's got his hand raised.
Wait, let me unmute it for a second.
There you go.
There you go, Lee.
Yeah. Hi, guys. Great presentation. Just a couple of quick questions. One is, can you talk a little bit about the difference between disclosure and acceptance? Meaning, here's an example: you're talking with somebody or your boss or somebody else, and you have a block or you have a difficult time. You say, "Oh yes, I stutter." So there's a disclosure, but you're not really disclosing to yourself, or except, in other words, you're still avoiding, you're still not feeling good about yourself as a person who stutters. And you can say, well, I disclosed. So can you talk about that kind of nuance about the intent of the disclosure?
Yeah, I'll take a shot at that one, Chris, just because I've thought a lot about this recently with Rod as we were writing up these recent papers. And Lee, I think you're absolutely right. So one thing that Rod and I thought about was this idea of openness versus disclosure. They're not the same thing. And you can disclose technically, but not be very open. I would say that very often, if you disclose a lot, you're probably more open, but that's not necessarily true, because you could disclose out of desperation or out of embarrassment or out of fear, and you could still not be very open. So I look at the idea, and I think that's kind of what you mean by acceptance. I look at this idea of openness as kind of a trait. It's like a way of being, basically. It's an open stance, an open posture about your stuttering, where you're okay to talk about it. You might have some like humor about it. You might enjoy talking about it with other people. So I would distinguish between the idea of being open about it as a trait versus disclosure, which is an actual event. So disclosure is the actual act of transmitting the information that you are a person who stutters. And openness is more, this is how I am as a person. That's what I would say.
Yeah, I would agree with you, Mike, that that disclosure is a way to achieve acceptance, right? It's a step towards acceptance. I know when something that I've struggled with, and I've seen a lot of the people I work with struggle with, is that often you're disclosing before you're stuttering openly, right? That I might tell you that I stutter, but when I stutter, I'm tense and I'm trying to hide it, and I'm trying to make it as minimal as possible. And disclosure is a means towards acceptance, I would say. But just because you're disclosing doesn't mean you've accepted your stuttering. There's at the beginning of this talk, I mentioned that I'm a co-editor of a book. I'm going to put a link in the chat. It just has lots of stories of, I think, people being open about their stuttering, and if anybody is interested, they can read more there.
Perfect. Thanks for sharing that, Chris. Again, thanks, Mike. Thanks, Chris, for being here. Thank you all to who showed up for the past 3 days. We really appreciate you guys participating in this event with us, and thank you so much for your time. If there's no other questions, we wish you a very happy Thanksgiving and a great weekend.
Thanks, everybody. Take care.
Yeah.
Bye, everyone. Thank you, Tammy.
Yeah.
Thank you, Mandy.